Colombia, it's home to a bounty of one of the world's most precious resources. Yet not all Colombians are getting their fair share. We travel to a remote corner of the country where an extraordinary woman is fighting for her community's very survival. In some parts of the world, it's as rare as gold. And getting hold of some, nearly impossible.
Are you going to give some of the water to the community where we live, for the school and the village?
Griselda Polanco says her community's water is being stolen.
The water that's going to be taken out of our land here, we are not able to benefit from it.
Griselda is Wayuu, one of Colombia's largest indigenous groups, and she believes they're being discriminated against by the authorities.
I asked them to give us water for the village, for all the inhabitants of Pesuapa, and a year ago they promised they would, but until now the water hasn't arrived.
Fresh water, or Wayuu gold as they call it, will soon be siphoned from Wayuu lands through new pipes to a nearby town where the population are not indigenous. And Griselda will do whatever it takes to at least keep some of their water.
I want to know who is the contractor here, to talk to him, and if not, we are going to stop this work.
Such struggles for ethnic rights are repeated across the country. Recently, 10,000 representatives of indigenous groups took to the streets of the capital, Bogotá. They were demanding, among other things, their right to water. Without access to it, the very survival of many indigenous peoples is threatened. And no group more so than the Wayuu, whose ancestral land in the northeastern La Guajira region is largely desert. Griselda's family has lived on Wayuu land for generations. Her grandmother is anywhere between 80 and 102.
My 4 children grew up here. When I arrived, there was hardly anyone here. I came with my goats and my donkeys.
In those days, rainfall here was more frequent and food for the animals abundant. But with the changing climate, water has become ever scarcer, says Griselda's mother.
Before, there were not only dry seasons, there were wet seasons. But now, 2 years can go by without it raining.
The result, the traditional water reserves are drying up, putting 300,000 Wayuus across the region in jeopardy. Filled with collected rains, these reserves are their main source of water. But now they contain just a fraction of what they used to. And what's left is stagnant and almost undrinkable.
There are still people who have to drink this green water, though there are only the dregs left. But it's harmful. It gives us diarrhea. It fills the children with parasites. You can see some of the children are really thin, but they have big tummies. That's because of the water.
The problem is so bad that acute diarrhea is one of the leading killers amongst local children under 5. With no clean water left in these reservoirs, the Wayuu have no choice but to turn to their only other source of water: taps scattered across their lands, linked to underground reserves. As she does several times a day, Griselda's aunt sets off to one of the distant taps. It's noon and almost 42 degrees centigrade as she trudges through the sand. A kilometre later, she finally arrives. But the water that comes out is far from sweet.
It's from an underground spring, but it was perforated. It's now salt water.
A painful reminder, Griselda says, of the urgent need to secure safe and plentiful water for her people. And alongside Griselda, in the front line of this fight, her own sister, Orsinia. As the first indigenous woman elected to the Colombian Congress in 2006, her highest priority has always been to have water recognized as a fundamental right for all Colombians.
One of my biggest dreams, which I've always fought for and argued, is that there's water for the Wayuu people. It's the main thing I want.
But the bill she introduced in 2009 failed to pass, disappointing many.
The state has a huge responsibility to support indigenous peoples in preserving their culture.
Margarita Bueso of UN Women says the indigenous struggle for basic rights like water is especially complicated in Colombia. Decades of violent conflict over drugs and politics have taken a particularly heavy toll on ethnic communities. Too often they are the victims of massacres or tragically caught up in the crossfire between various armed groups.
It's the men who die in the confrontations between the different illegal armed groups. The women are the survivors of the conflict.
And this leaves them bearing the burden of the struggle to survive. Something made even more difficult by their dwindling water resources, says Griselda.
In order to feed ourselves, we raise animals. But at the moment, the animals are dying of hunger because there are no pastures, and they are suffering the same as we are from the lack of water.
Back at the village, much to Griselda's surprise, the chief water engineer suddenly turns up and wants to talk to her. She longs for a glimmer of hope, but he has no real answers.
What I'm going to do is look at the calculations and see if the water really can reach here.
Griselda, however, is skeptical. She believes the only reason for his visit is because of the filming.
The engineer who is in charge, when he saw you with your cameras, that was when they decided to talk and to tell us that they are going to bring water to the community. But they weren't saying this before.
If they do get some of this water, this Wayuu community's survival, at least in the short term, is assured. But if these are yet more empty promises, Griselda fears the prospects for her people are bleak.
The truth is that we will have a future if we manage to get the free water they told us they are going to give us. Without the water, we have no future.